The name Kratos today conjures up a single image: a scarred warrior drenched in ash and rage, tearing gods apart with his bare hands. But the real Kratos, the one who stood beside Zeus in the oldest Greek myths, was not a hero, nor even a warrior. He was something colder, something more terrifying. Kratos was the living embodiment of strength without mercy, of power stripped of compassion. He was not meant to be loved, or even admired. He was meant to be feared. In the quiet halls of Olympus, Kratos was not a rebel. He was the enforcer. When Zeus ordered punishment, Kratos carried it out. When rebellion stirred, he crushed it. He was the god of brute authority, not glory. Yet centuries later, this obscure figure, mentioned only a few times in ancient Greek literature, would be reborn as one of modern gaming's most complex icons. The journey from myth to myth again, from ancient poem to digital legend, is one of the strangest transformations in storytelling history. To understand the real Kratos, we must travel back not to Sparta, but to the dawn of the Greek imagination, when gods still bled. Titans still groaned beneath the earth, and every word carried a hidden meaning. The Kratos of myth was not a man of vengeance, but an idea. And like all dangerous ideas, he has survived longer than the gods who birthed him, the god of strength before the game. Long before the roar of battle, before chains and ashes, Kratos appeared in one of humanity's oldest surviving poems, the Theogony by Hesiod, written nearly 2,700 years ago. There, Kratos is not a protagonist, not even a deity with temples or worshippers. He is a shadow behind Zeus, the unspoken arm of divine authority. His name, Kratos, simply means strength, might, or power. But in Greek thought, words were never just words, they were forces of creation. To the Greeks, Kratos wasn't about muscle or bravery, it was about the right or the terror to command. The same root word gives us democracy, demos, plus Kratos' power of the people, and autocracy, self plus power. Every form of rule contained Kratos at its heart, the pure energy of domination. Hesiod's Kratos, therefore, was not an individual, but the cosmic principle of control itself, summoned by Zeus to bind chaos into order. Unlike Ares, who gloried in battle, or Athena, who embodied wisdom in war, Kratos had no complexity. He was obedience made flesh. When Zeus needed punishment dealt without hesitation, Kratos answered. He had no myths of his own, no prayers, no festivals. It was a reminder that power in its rawest form is neither good nor evil. It simply is. In ancient literature, Kratos appears so briefly that most readers miss him entirely. But to the ancient Greeks, his appearance beside Zeus spoke volumes. It was a warning. Even the gods required enforcers. Even Olympus needed someone who didn't question orders. And in that silence, in that brutal simplicity, lies the true forgotten essence of Kratos, born of Titans, the family of power and fear. Kratos' family tells us everything about his role in the universe. He was not the son of Zeus, as the games might suggest. In Hesiod's account, Kratos and his siblings Beaforce, zealous zeal, in Nike victory, were born of Pallas and Styx, the daughter of the dreadful river that bordered the underworld. They were not divine in the gentle sense, but embodiments of the forces that make divine rule possible. When the great Titanomachi, the war between Titans and Olympians, raged across the heavens, it was Styx who first brought her children to Zeus. While the other gods hesitated, Kratos and his siblings pledged immediate loyalty. That act earned them an eternal place beside the new king of the gods. From then on, they became Zeus' inner circle, his enforcers, his messengers of punishment, his symbols of victory and control. This family is more symbolic than genealogical. Styx, the river of unbreakable oaths, represents the boundary between life and death. Pallas, their father, symbolizes warcraft and strategy. Their children, Kratos, Bea, zealous, Nike, together, embody every pillar of authority, power, force, zeal, and victory. They are not gods one can pray to. They are concepts that keep gods in power. And yet, this family was not cruel by nature. They were necessary. In the Greek worldview, even justice required force. Zeus' throne depended on Kratos' loyalty. The world of Olympus was not a paradise. It was a hierarchy built on obedience. To the ancient Greeks, this was divine order, a reflection of their own city-states, armies, and laws. Kratos was the invisible chain that held everything together, sibling of Nike, Bia, and Zeus, the forces of Zeus. To understand the true Kratos, we must understand his siblings, for they together formed a divine ideology. Nike, goddess of victory, was the radiant face of success. She crowned the victors of war and the athletes of Olympia. Zealous or zeal represented the burning ambition that drives men and gods to act. Bia, or force, embodied the physical compulsion behind every command. In Kratos, their brother, was the enduring strength that sustains it all. In Greek art and literature, these four siblings often appear together beside Zeus' throne. They were not his servants, but his extensions, each representing a different aspect of authority. When Zeus hurled his lightning bolt, Bia delivered its impact. When his rule was challenged, Kratos ensured submission. When victory was declared, Nike was there to crown it. And when ambition stirred in the hearts of mortals, Zeus whispered encouragement. Together, they maintained cosmic order. Yet beneath this balance lies something unsettling. The Greeks, ever reflective, saw in these deities the dangers of power unchecked. Too much Zeus led to envy. Too much Bia bred cruelty. Too much Kratos created tyranny. Victory without justice, strength without wisdom. These were the themes that haunted Greek tragedy. The very siblings who upheld Zeus's reign also mirrored humanity's flaws. In this sense, the real Kratos was never meant to be celebrated. He was a mirror, a reminder that even divine power is fragile when severed from virtue. The Greeks respected him, but they did not love him. It was the cost of order, the shadow that follows every throne. Kratos in Hesiod's Theogony, the silent enforcer. In Hesiod's Theogony, the great poem that mapped the divine genealogy of Greece, Kratos enters the stage, not with thunder or flame, but with silence. He stands beside Zeus, expressionless, an instrument rather than a personality. His introduction is brief, so brief that many modern readers might dismiss him as incidental. But to the ancient Greeks, brevity did not mean insignificance. To appear even once beside Zeus was to be eternal. Kratos' first task, according to Hesiod, was to help enforce Zeus' rule after the Titanomachy, the cosmic war that had shattered the old order. The Olympians had won, but peace required obedience. Chaos had been defeated, yet chaos always returns unless it is kept in chains. Kratos and his siblings, Bia, Nike, and Zeus, became the locks on those chains. They ensured that Zeus' decrees were not questioned, that the universe itself obeyed its new master. This Kratos is not a warrior in the mortal sense. He is not a soldier charging into battle, but the embodiment of law's power, the unyielding strength that upholds hierarchy. There are no hymns to him, because he grants no blessings. No temples, because he demands no faith. He is a concept given form, the embodiment of divine enforcement. The Greeks, who loved to humanize their gods, deliberately left Kratos vague, because strength without mercy could not be human. And so, Hesiod's Kratos lingers not as a character, but as a principle. He is the shadow behind every ruler, mortal or divine, whose throne rests on power rather than persuasion. That single poetic appearance, cold, controlled, unfeeling, shaped the meaning of his name forever. The ancient Kratos was never meant to be loved. It was meant to remind mortals what happens when strength replaces justice. A god without mercy, the true meaning of Kratos. The word Kratos in Greek carries a gravity that is often lost in translation. In English, we soften it. We call it strength or might. But to the Greeks, Kratos was not the strength of the body, nor even the courage of the heart. It was the brutal ability to compel the authority to make others submit. When ancient writers used Kratos, they were speaking of dominance, of power so absolute it no longer questioned itself. To call someone Kratos strong was not necessarily a compliment. It suggested a kind of violence, a force that could break through walls or men with equal indifference. Even Zeus' Kratos was not gentle. Greeks understood that power by its nature is impersonal. It does not love, it does not pity, it simply acts. And so, Kratos as a god was that very energy made flesh. When modern audiences picture Kratos as a man tortured by guilt and rage, they are seeing a later humanized form of something the Greeks never meant to be human. The real Kratos was not a tragic figure, he was inevitability itself. His personality was the will of Zeus, his purpose was to crush rebellion before it began. In this sense, Kratos in myth was far more terrifying than any mortal hero. He was not cruel because he enjoyed cruelty. He was cruel because the universe demanded order. The Greeks, pragmatic as ever, saw in him the reflection of their own governments, armies, and hierarchies. It was the power that built cities and the violence that kept them standing. Kratos in Prometheus, the chains of authority. Of all his appearances, Kratos' most haunting moment lies in Prometheus Bound, a tragedy attributed to Aeschylus. Here, he steps onto the stage not as a symbol, but as a voice, commanding, merciless, and cold. His mission? To chain Prometheus to a rock for defying Zeus and giving fire to humankind. The play opens with Kratos escorting the blacksmith god Hephaestus and the silent presence of Bia, Force herself. Hephaestus hesitates, pitying the condemned titan. But Kratos feels no hesitation, no sympathy. His dialogue is sharp and mechanical, every line dripping with obedience to Zeus' will. Obey the commands of the Father, he tells Hephaestus. Fear the wrath of power. When Hephaestus trembles, Kratos mocks him for weakness. Compassion, in Kratos' world, is treason. In this moment, Kratos becomes more than a mythic enforcer. He becomes the voice of tyranny. He is the personification of the machinery of power, emotionless, loyal, and efficient. When Prometheus cries out in defiance, Kratos does not argue. He simply reminds him that the punishment of rebellion is eternal. The Greeks who watched this play knew the horror it carried. They had lived under kings, tyrants, and empires. They understood that Kratos was not merely a god on stage, he was a truth about power itself. Every government, every ruler requires its Kratos, the one who follows orders without question, who keeps the world running through pain. Not hero, the mythic role of Kratos. Unlike heroes such as Heracles, Perseus, or Achilles, Kratos never acted on his own will. He did not chase glory or seek redemption. His purpose was to serve. In this, he was the anti-hero of Greek myth, a reminder that even divine strength can be enslaved to authority. His presence beside Zeus was not one of companionship, but of subservience. In the structure of Greek thought, Kratos represents the final stage of power when it stops being questioned. A king might begin his rule with justice and vision, but once Kratos takes hold, his decisions become law simply because they are his. The Greeks saw this pattern repeated endlessly, in cities, in families, in the very heavens. Kratos was the endpoint of ambition. What makes Kratos fascinating is that he does not rebel, like Prometheus, who suffers for defiance, or Heracles, earns immortality through struggle. Kratos never questions Zeus. In this obedience lies his tragedy, not the tragedy of suffering, but of emptiness. He has power without freedom, strength without identity. The playwrights who used Kratos as a symbol did so to warn their audiences. Power that obeys without conscience becomes tyranny. Kratos is not the villain of myth, he is its instrument, and perhaps that is what makes him so haunting. He is what every ruler desires, and what every free mind fears becoming. Strength without wisdom, the Greek view of blind power. To the ancient Greeks, wisdom and strength were meant to balance each other. Athena, goddess of strategy, represented Sophia, the intellect that guides action. Kratos, on the other hand, represented Bia, the physical execution of that will. When separated, the Greeks believed these two forces could destroy civilization itself. In tragedy after tragedy, playwrights showed the consequences of Kratos without Sophia. In Antigone, King Creon's stubborn adherence to law destroys his family. In Prometheus Bound, Zeus's power becomes cruelty when unchecked by compassion. The lesson was clear. Strength without thought is tyranny, just as thought without strength is impotence. Kratos, therefore, was the perfect embodiment of imbalance, the necessary but dangerous half of divine rule. The Greeks did not hate him. They feared what he represented within themselves. Every soldier, every citizen, every leader carried a spark of Kratos, the capacity to obey too fully, to strike without thinking. The myths were not moral lectures, they were mirrors. And when the Greeks looked into the mirror of Kratos, they saw the fragile line between order and oppression, a line every civilization must walk, even today. Why Kratos was feared even by gods. Among the Olympians, few inspired true fear, but Kratos did. Even Ares, the god of war, was passionate and chaotic. His rage could be reasoned with. Kratos, however, was something colder. He had no ego to appeal to, no desire that could be bargained away. His loyalty made him unstoppable. Zeus himself relied on Kratos, not because he trusted him, but because he knew he would never hesitate. In Greek cosmology, gods often quarreled and betrayed one another. But Kratos' loyalty was absolute, and that made him terrifying. He was proof that obedience, once complete, becomes a form of divine power in itself. His presence beside Zeus served as a warning to other gods. Rebellion would be crushed not by Zeus' lightning, but by Kratos' unflinching hand. Some scholars suggest that this is why Kratos never received independent worship, not out of neglect, but out of fear. To pray to Kratos was to invite the attention of authority itself. To call on his name was to call on the power that destroys defiance. In myth, the gods who lack temples are often the most dangerous. Kratos' strength was respected, but respect born of terror is not devotion. And so he remained what he was always meant to be, the god who exists only in service, and the reminder that even divine power trembles before its own reflection. The philosophy of force. What the Greeks meant by Kratos. To the ancient Greeks, Kratos wasn't just a god, it was a principle. The word meant power, rule, or might, but it carried a warning. Yet, power, they believed, was essential for order, yet dangerous when left unrestrained. Even the gods feared the consequences of too much authority. Zeus ruled Olympus by force, but his control depended on figures like Kratos, the enforcer of divine will, whose loyalty was absolute, and whose compassion was non-existent. Greek philosophers wrestled with this paradox. Heraclitus saw conflict and force as the engines of creation. War is the father of all things. Plato disagreed, warning that when Kratos was ruled by ignorance or passion, justice collapsed. Democracy itself, Kratos, the power of the people, could easily turn into chaos if wisdom did not guide strength. Power was necessary, but it had to be chained by reason, or it would devour the very order it sought to protect. In Greek tragedy, Kratos was the face of that cold authority. When he appeared in Prometheus Bound, commanding Hephaestus to chain Prometheus to the rock, he spoke without mercy. The audience would have recognized him as both protector and oppressor, the spirit of law that keeps the world stable, yet smothers anything that resists. He was not evil, but he was terrifyingly pure, strength without doubt, power without reflection. For the Greeks, this was the eternal struggle. Every city, every god. Every man needed Kratos to survive, but too much of it led to tyranny. Their myths, their philosophy, even their politics revolved around this fragile balance. In the end, Kratos represented both the foundation and the flaw of civilization. The reminder that power, no matter how divine, is only righteous when it remembers mercy. Kratos and the birth of tyranny in Greek thought. When the Greeks spoke of tyranny, they didn't imagine a mustache-twirling villain. They imagined Kratos, not as a man, but as the spirit that animates absolute power. In Aeschylus' tragedies and later Greek philosophy, Kratos embodied the danger of control without consent, a force that crushes under the weight of its own certainty. The word tyrannos didn't always mean evil. Early on, it simply meant one who seized power. But to the Greeks, the moment strength stopped serving justice, it became tyranny, and Kratos was that turning point personified. In Prometheus Bound, Kratos doesn't question Zeus's order to chain Prometheus. He simply obeys. His indifference is what makes him horrifying. The philosopher's mind saw this as the core of tyranny. Not passion, not cruelty, but obedience without morality. A tyrant does not need to be a monster. He only needs to stop asking why. Political philosophers like Aristotle later dissected this force. For them, a just ruler wielded Kratos through law, but a tyrant wielded it through fear. Both governed by strength, yet only one respected limits. In this, Kratos was not the villain of Greek thought, but its warning label, a symbol of what happens when the necessary. Virtue of strength becomes an uncontrollable instinct to dominate. Even centuries later, poets and historians remembered Kratos not as a hero, but as a reflection, a mirror for every ruler, every general, every man who thought power itself was proof of rightness. For the Greeks, Tyranny was born not in hate, but in the silence of those who serve it faithfully. Political Kratos. How the word became democracy. The Greeks left behind a curious legacy. They named their greatest political experiment after the very concept they feared. Kratos, the power of the people. The irony wasn't lost on philosophers of the time. Athens, in its golden age, had turned the divine principle of Kratos into a human institution. Strength was no longer the tool of kings or gods. It belonged to citizens. But even here, the shadow of the old god lingered. In democratic Athens, Kratos could be noble, a collective force defending freedom. Yet it could also be ruthless. When the people voted to execute Socrates or to slaughter the men of Melos during the Peloponnesian War, it wasn't tyranny from above, it was Kratos from below. Power had changed hands, but not its nature. Writers like Thucydides understood this tragedy perfectly. In his accounts of war and politics, he showed how democracy itself could mirror despotism when guided by fear and emotion. Kratos didn't care who held it. It simply obeyed whoever was strongest in the moment. Thus, democracy was not a victory over the god of power. It was his transformation. Kratos had moved from Olympus to the assembly, from the hand of Zeus to the voices of men. And in doing so, he proved that no matter how civilized a society becomes, strength in any form always demands restraint. Kratos in tragedy, from Aeschylus to Sophocles. Greek tragedy was where Kratos truly found a voice and a warning. Aeschylus, in his Prometheus bound, gave him shape and purpose. The iron hand of divine justice, unbending and merciless. Sophocles refined this idea further. His kings Oedipus, Creon, are not gods, yet they share the flaw of Kratos, the belief that power alone can impose order. In tragedy, Kratos always ends in collapse. Oedipus blinds himself when he realizes that his strength, his certainty, was his undoing. Creon loses his family because he cannot bend. Even Antigone's defiance, noble as it is, becomes destructive when pride hardens into stubbornness. The Greeks understood that force, whether divine or human, consumes itself when unchecked by humility. To watch a tragedy in ancient Athens was not mere entertainment. It was a civic ritual. Citizens saw their own reflections in the rise and fall of kings. The lesson was clear. Kratos might build cities, armies, and empires, but without sophrosyne balance, moderation, it would turn to ruin. Through drama, the Greeks turned Kratos from a god into a moral symbol, one that asked, again and again, what happens when the will to control becomes stronger than the will to understand? The moral of power, why the Greeks distrusted strength. Modern audiences often admire strength. The hero who crushes his enemies, the ruler who restores order. But the Greeks were far more skeptical. They saw strength as a double-edged sword, divine yet dangerous. Their heroes, from Achilles to Heracles, were not celebrated for their muscles, but pitied for their lack of restraint. Kratos, therefore, wasn't just a mythic being. He was the embodiment of this unease. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle defined the ideal man as one who mastered himself. True power, they argued, was not domination over others, but control over one's own passions. The man who cannot govern his anger or ambition is a slave, even if he wears a crown. To them, Kratos represented the opposite: strength ungoverned, justice unexamined, the brute certainty that silences thought. This is why Greek temples glorified balance, proportion, and calm. Even their gods were meant to mirror the human need for restraint. Ares was feared, not honored. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, was preferred. She was what Kratos could never be: power guided by reason. In distrusting strength, the Greeks laid the foundation of Western ethics. They taught that the hand that builds civilization must always tremble just slightly, with the memory of what happens when might forgets mercy. Mythological echoes, Kratos in later Greek philosophy. By the time of the later philosophers, the Stoics, the Cynics, the Neoplatonists, Kratos had faded as a deity, but survived as an idea. He became a metaphor for inner mastery, the struggle between rational mind and chaotic emotion. The Stoics especially saw him as the perfect warning. External power was meaningless unless one could rule the self. Seneca wrote that no man is powerful who is not master of himself. Marcus Aurelius, centuries later, would echo the same. though he never named Kratos. The spirit of that old god haunted his meditations. When he wrote of suppressing anger, enduring hardship, and serving duty without pride, he was, in essence, taming Kratos within. For philosophers, Kratos had become the human condition, the eternal tug between reason and desire. The myths of Olympus had been replaced by the ethics of the soul, but the question remained unchanged. Who rules you, your wisdom or your strength? Thus, even as the temples fell and myths turned to metaphor, Kratos endured not as a god of violence, but as a whisper in every act of choice. The Greeks may have buried his name, but they never escaped his lesson. The greatest struggle is not against others, but against the power that lives inside you. From myth to man, the birth of the God of War franchise. When God of War first released in 2005, most players didn't realize that Kratos was not an invention of the developers, he was a resurrection. Sony Santa Monica's creative team reached deep into Greek myth to unearth a forgotten deity of strength and obedience, then breathed life into him as something new, part demigod, part monster, part man. But unlike the silent Kratos of Hesiod, this one screamed. This Kratos was a soldier, scarred and furious, cursed to serve the gods he despised. In his story, the myth of obedience turned on itself. The ancient Kratos followed orders without question. The modern Kratos destroyed the gods who gave them. It was a rebellion born of trauma, a reflection of every mythic warrior who realized too late that power demanded a price. The creative brilliance of this new version lay in its tragedy. Players weren't asked to cheer for Kratos' rage, they were made to feel it. Every swing of the Blades of Chaos carried memory, regret, and defiance. The original myth of strength had become a meditation on pain. Kratos was no longer strength personified, it was strength broken. In doing so, God of War revived more than a myth. It revived the moral questions the Greeks had left behind. Can a man escape the cycle of violence that defines him? Can strength ever lead to peace? Kratos, once an ancient symbol of tyranny, became the digital mirror of our modern struggle with power itself. Greek Kratos versus game Kratos, mythology reimagined. The mythic Kratos was simple, a force, not a person. The God of War Kratos, however, is complex, conflicted, and human. The transformation between these two versions of the same name reveals something profound. Mythology evolves to fit the fears of its time. Ancient Greeks feared tyranny. Modern audiences fear rage and consequence. In myth, Kratos was loyal to Zeus. In the game, he defies him. This reversal is not accidental. It's philosophical. The modern Kratos embodies the rejection of blind obedience, the same rebellion that defines our age of individualism. Where the old Kratos represented unquestioned order, the new one represents the cost of freedom. His chains, both literal and emotional, symbolize the same paradox that haunted Hesiod's version: strength cannot save you from yourself. Every battle Kratos fights against gods, titans, or fate is a repetition of his own inner war. His tragedy lies not in being powerful, but in never being able to control what his power does. In that sense, God of War isn't just a reinterpretation of myth, it's a continuation of it. Like Aeschylus or Sophocles, the developers crafted a modern tragedy where divine might meets human flaw. The Kratos of today may wield pixels instead of lightning, but the moral is unchanged. Every act of power leaves a scar. The Norse saga, Kratos becomes a father. When God of War 2018 arrived, Kratos had changed, and so had the myth. The screaming warrior of Olympus was now an aging man wandering a frozen land of Norse gods, carrying not vengeance but a son. This transition was monumental. The narrative shifted from divine rebellion to quiet redemption. The once merciless god had become a father haunted by his past. In Norse lands, Kratos confronted not only new gods but himself. The world around him reflected his own evolution. Colder, quieter, yet heavy with the weight of destiny. Every word he spoke to Atreus was a lesson written in regret. The man who once obeyed Zeus now tried to prevent his son from following the same path. It was the most human transformation a myth could take, the monster learning to nurture. The Norse saga turned mythological vengeance into emotional therapy. It wasn't about conquering gods anymore. It was about conquering inherited pain. Kratos, once chained by the will of Olympus, was now chained by fatherhood, a bond more binding than any divine punishment. In giving Kratos a child, the storytellers did what the ancient Greeks never dared. They gave the god of power a conscience. The real battles were no longer against external enemies, but against the rage and guilt inside him. And for the first time, Kratos was not feared, he was understood. The psychology of the new Kratos: guilt, rage, and redemption. Behind every strike of Kratos' axe lies a human truth: anger is easier than grief. The Norse Kratos is not driven by bloodlust, but by trauma. The ghosts of his past, his slain wife and daughter, the gods he murdered, linger in every silence. His stoicism is not strength, it is survival. The once roaring god of destruction has become a monument of quiet suffering. His transformation speaks to a deeper truth about myth in modern times. Gods have become mirrors for human emotion. Kratos' rage once fueled entertainment. Now it provokes empathy. He is what the Greeks might have called pathos incarnate, the embodiment of pain-seeking purpose. The old Kratos represented the dangers of blind obedience. The new one represents the struggle to forgive oneself. Psychologically, he's the perfect tragic hero. He has achieved everything and lost everything. He seeks peace, yet can only find it through violence. His son Atreus becomes both his salvation and his test, a living reminder of what power can destroy if left unchecked. By turning Kratos into a character capable of guilt, modern mythmakers brought ancient morality full circle. The Greeks warned that Kratos without wisdom leads to ruin. Now, millennia later, the game's Kratos shows that only through self-control can strength become love. The return of myth, how Kratos became a modern Greek tragedy. In the end, Kratos' journey from ancient symbol to digital legend completes a cycle older than civilization itself. His story mirrors every great myth: hubris, downfall, suffering, and redemption. But unlike the gods of Olympus, he learns. Evolution is not just narrative, it's philosophical. It's the rebirth of tragedy in a modern form. Like Oedipus, Kratos blinds himself to his past until it consumes him. Like Heracles, he carries the burden of his own violence. Yet unlike those figures, he finds a path forward, not through divine forgiveness, but through human endurance. The modern Kratos does not seek to be loved or worshipped, seeks to change. In this transformation lies the secret to his timelessness. The mythic Kratos represented the terror of power. The modern one represents the hope of redemption. His saga has become our era's mythology, told not on temple walls, but through pixels and sound. It is the same ancient desire to understand why we fight, why we suffer, and whether forgiveness is possible after destruction. When the screen fades to black and Kratos lays down his axe, we are left with the same feeling that haunted the Greeks thousands of years ago. Sorrow, and the understanding that even gods must struggle to be human. As the flames of Olympus fade and the echoes of ancient myth die out, one truth remains. Kratos, both the god and the man, was never just a warrior. He was an idea, a reflection of humanity's endless struggle with strength, rage, obedience, and redemption. The ancient Greeks saw him as the embodiment of force, raw, unquestioning, and merciless. But we, centuries later, reimagined him as something far deeper, a soul seeking meaning beyond power. It's poetic, isn't it? The god who once symbolized the tyranny of Zeus has become the face of our own moral awakening, a killer who learns to be a father, a destroyer who learns restraint, a symbol of chaos who finally understands peace. From myth to controller, Kratos has traveled further than any Greek hero ever could, not across lands, but across time, across human emotion, across the entire spectrum of what it means to be strong. If there's one lesson his journey teaches, it's this: power without purpose is destruction. But power guided by pain, by reflection, by love, that's what turns a monster into a legend. Kratos didn't just break his chains in the story. He broke free from what the Greeks believed gods could be. He became something new, something ours. So if you've made it this far into the depths of myth and memory, thank you for walking this path with me. The world of gods and mortals is vast, and there are still so many forgotten corners to explore, stories that twist history, myth, and meaning into something hauntingly human. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real Kratos, the god before the game, then make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next descent into the strange, the mythical, and the forgotten. And before you go, tell me in the comments below. Do you think our Kratos has surpassed the one that ancients created? Or did the Greeks already understand something we've long forgotten about the nature of strength? Because after all, myths never truly die. They just change their faces.